side of the room. So good morning. This is our 20th annual Outstanding Citizens Award. Why don't we start off and everybody rise and do the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Pledge Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So before we get started, I want to just take a minute to acknowledge some of the VIPs and dignitaries that have come time and time again over the last 20 years. From the Sacramento Police Department, Deputy Chief Ken Bernard, Captain Lisa Buckley, I'm hopeful that Chief Hahn will be here shortly. From the Sheriff's Department, Sergeant Kevin Gibbons is here for a special reason as well. From CHP, Chief Brent Newman from the Valley Division. From Citrus Heights Police Department, Chief Ron Lawrence, he's also the president of Cal Chiefs. From Elk Grove, Chief Noblin. From Folsom Police Department, Chief Rick Hillman and Lieutenant Chris Emery. From the U.S. Attorney's Office, my friend and longtime colleague, McGregor Scott, our U.S. Attorney. From the Public Defender's Office, Torres in the room, Assistant Public Defender Tor Zielinski, so thank you for being here. From the office, Sac City Office of Public Safety is Francine Chernauer. From Department of Corrections, Victim and Survivor Rights Services, we have Tiffany Johnston. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to just start this off with the same thing we did last year, the question of why are we here and why are we here today? I think most of us that work in this line of business know that this is National Crime Victims' Rights Week. And it's an opportunity for us, not just in this community, but across our country and across our state to recognize our victims and witnesses that have demonstrated extraordinary courage, overcome fear, shame, and oftentimes indifference to speak up and to seek and fight for justice as we do every day. I think we all know, particularly in our community, that's been an ever-increasing challenge. Behind me on the displays are our memory quilts from our Homicide Support Network. There are 9 of those quilts, and they are shown on both the screens because we want everybody to remember that these are not just faces. These are human beings whose lives were taken in our community by violence that has forever changed their families and our community. So I ask you all just to take a look at them and understand that these were people that were taken from our community. This year's theme for Crime Victims Week is honoring our past and creating hope for the future. And so in terms, before we get into this year's recipients, I want to just take a minute to honor our past. And I ask that those are here that are past recipients of awards from this ceremony to please stand for a minute and just to be recognized. So Patty, you want to stand up? Thank you. Just to give you a sense of, they're not just their commitment to justice, but their commitment to victims. Mr. Kennedy, who's over here on my left, lost his daughter in 1985 when she went shopping at the Art Fair Mall. Patty Ryan, who I know very personally now, was assaulted by her bus driver. She reminded me today, Pat, those of you who don't know, Patty's developmentally disabled, but she reminded me today that she testified in 2001. And she's been here with her mom, Shirley, pretty much every year. We're now in 2019. And this morning, I texted somebody that some folks might know in this room. Her name was Nancy Honeycutt. If Donna Gissing's in there, she'll remember. Nancy Honeycutt is the reason why we started this award ceremony 20 years ago. Nancy was home on a lunch break. She worked for San Juan Unified School District and was on a lunch break. I think it was in the late 90s. When she saw something outside her window of a man trying to lure 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, into his car. and she knew that something just wasn't right. And so she screamed outside the window at the person that was luring these little girls into the car. And she yelled at him, and she said something to the effect, "I got your plate. What do you think you're doing?" And those kids got into the car, and then by the time he got to the front of the apartment complex, he got scared and he let them out. It was because of Nancy Honeycutt that law enforcement, the sheriff's department, was able to track down the serial kidnapper, serial sex offender, a guy by the name of David Budston. And ultimately, he was tried and he was convicted and he was sentenced to prison to life. So this morning I texted Nancy to see if she was going to come. I mean, it's 20 years. And she said she couldn't come, but this is what she sent back to me in the text, that she couldn't believe it's been 20 years. She said, I do want to tell you again, especially 20 years into this, thank you for giving this opportunity to those of us who sometimes feel like we don't have a voice, to show the power of speaking up when something isn't quite right. Here is to at least 20 more years of speaking up and honoring those who can't. There is no doubt in my mind that our past and present recipients are those people that are providing hope for the future. In the last few years when we've had this ceremony, there's certain phrases I've used, some of them stolen from other people, like Robbie Gold over here. One of which is, it's a good day for the people. Today is a good day for the people. Another one was, there's a superhero in all of us. It just takes courage to put on the cape. There's a lot of superheroes in this room, and it does take a lot of courage to put on that cape. And every day on the streets of Sacramento, there are countless people in our community that have become victims or witnesses to crime. Some of those crimes are unspeakable. Some of them are some things that we would ever even want to talk about. And those are the individuals that have courage and strength to achieve justice. Sometimes it's just the strength to pick up the phone, to call the police or the sheriff, to divulge facts that are so graphic and horrific that we wonder why they report it all. Some of them that have the strength just to say enough is enough. It could be a victim, that's the victim of a spouse or a partner who suffered years of abuse by people they thought they could trust the most. It could be a child in the same position who suffered abuse by someone they thought would protect them. It could be an elderly person who's been taken advantage of simply because of their age. Or perhaps it's a victim that just went shopping in the mall and suddenly their life changed forever. And it's not just victims, it's witnesses. Witnesses that might be witnessing something their own loved one did. Perhaps a parent or a brother or a sister of that abuser, or perhaps even a complete stranger who just happened upon one of those very crimes, who simply acted out of the goodness of humanity. This morning, we honor our local victims, as we've done across the state and across this nation, as well as our witnesses, who have demonstrated extraordinary courage in difficult circumstances in the pursuit of justice. Those that went above and beyond, not only to protect and help a victim in need, to make sure that justice was served. Today, like every year, our outstanding citizen recipients have been nominated by deputy district attorneys, victim advocates, and investigators. And they've been nominated because of their extraordinary courage and their ability to help law enforcement and hold individuals accountable. By agreeing to share their stories today, which again are very personal, I am very confident, as I am every year, that we walk away inspired and hopeful for the next year ahead of us. There's no doubt in my mind that this has been one of the most difficult years in our community, in our office, and I don't want anybody to forget this is why we do this job, because that's why, as I say oftentimes, we rise by lifting others. So I'm going to start off with asking Courtney Martin to come up. Courtney's recipient's not here, but I think it's incredibly important that you understand why she was nominated. So Courtney.
Good morning. My name is Courtney Martin, and I am a Deputy District Attorney here in Sacramento County, assigned to the Domestic Violence Unit. This is the victim advocate who works on my caseload, Leslie Owens. For women caught in domestic violence relationships, a supportive family member can be the difference between leaving a relationship and staying in a relationship. And that's why I'm pleased and honored today to tell you about Katrina Williams, one of those family members. In 2016, Katrina's stepdaughter, Antoinette, became the victim of a relationship defined by domestic violence. Antoinette was just 22 years old, but she's developmentally delayed, so she seemed much younger. Antoinette was raised in the Bay Area by her grandmother, her father, and her stepmother, Katrina. And then in 2016, things changed dramatically for Antoinette when she met and married Sheldon Williams, who's not a relative of Katrina, incidentally. The couple lived in Sacramento, and for several years, the family basically stopped hearing from Antoinette. It wasn't until 2018 that Antoinette revealed the abuse that was occurring. Her husband was regularly shooting her with a BB gun until her body was marked from head to toe with scars from the pellets, from the BBs. And some of those BBs even remained embedded under her skin. Antoinette had a fractured cheekbone from a time that her husband had smacked her with a shower rod. When you talk to Antoinette, she is sweet and polite and respectful, and it is shocking that another human being could abuse her in this way. Police arrested her husband, Sheldon Williams, and Antoinette returned to the Bay Area with her family. As detectives investigated the case, Antoinette often struggled to explain the timeline of events, both because of her disability and probably because of the trauma that she'd suffered. It was vitally important that Katrina helped law enforcement understand Antoinette's disability and also to fill in some of the details that she couldn't. As trial approached, the defendant insisted that he would take no plea deals because he was sure that Antoinette would not come to court and testify against him. And if you've worked in the domestic violence arena, you know that that is common. Even though he had a significant criminal record and there were several other women who had abused him in the past, he remained confident as the trial got underway because he absolutely believed Antoinette would be a no-show. And he knew if she didn't testify, we couldn't make the case. The first thing I did when I woke up on the morning of Antoinette's testimony was check my work messages. And I had two messages, both from Katrina. The first was a frantic message left at about 4:30 in the morning saying that Antoinette's baby was in the hospital. This was the week of the Paradise Fire, and the baby was suffering from an asthma attack. Katrina wasn't sure how they were going to make it from Oakland. The second message had been left a few minutes later, also by Katrina. Despite everything, they were on their way on a train and would be in Sacramento in a few hours. When Antoinette and Katrina arrived at the DA's office, they both looked exhausted after being up all night at the hospital. Katrina took me aside and explained that Antoinette had become very uncooperative. She was communicating with the defendant again, she no longer supported prosecution, and she did not want to testify. Katrina said that she had literally had to pull Antoinette onto the train that morning so that they could come to court and Antoinette could testify. I have no doubt that without Katrina's cooperation, Antoinette would not have come to Sacramento that morning. The case would have been dismissed, or at best, the defendant would have received a minimal sentence. Because of Katrina, Antoinette did testify that morning. She was reluctant and upset, but she admitted the various acts of abuse that she had suffered at the hands of her husband. Katrina testified as well and explained facts that gave context to the case. The defendant was convicted of 3 separate strike offenses and sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Antoinette continues to live with and be supported by Katrina and other family members. And when I called her about this nomination, Katrina explained to me about ways that they're trying to break Antoinette free of the defendant's influence. This case had plenty of people who touched it. Detective Kevin Patton at the Sacramento Police Department, who said that Katrina was very helpful when they were investigating the case and trying to put the facts together. My victim advocate, Leslie Owens, multiple DAs from the time of filing through trial. But in this case, on this day especially, it was Katrina's efforts to protect her stepdaughter. It was Katrina's commitment to justice that made the difference. And Katrina is ever the caregiver. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here today because she's taking care of her mother, who's hospitalized and sick. But it is my privilege, Anne Marie, to present to you Katrina Williams for this year's Outstanding Citizen.
Chief Palmer's here from the Sheriff's Department, and Chris, or someone. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Next up, I invite Deputy DA Bruce Chang to do the next presentation.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bruce Chang, and I'm the cybercrimes prosecutor from our office. One of the best things about living in the age of technology that we live in is that the world is open to us, is open to you, that we have unfettered access to information, to finding people or buying goods and services that would be unthinkable 20 years ago. The downside, of course, of living in this age of technology is that the world now has unfettered access to us, our personal information, photos, videos, and everything else. This is one of the reasons that we have a cybercrime unit. And one of the most serious kinds of crimes that we prosecute and investigate with the help of all of our partner agencies are internet crimes against children. Sexual predators online have access to some of the most vulnerable members of society in ways that we're not even aware of. To give everyone an idea of how prevalent this problem is and how much it's really exploded with the age of technology, in 1996, when the FBI first started keeping stats about the number of online sexual exploitation of children cases, they opened 113 cases nationwide. To put that in proper context, that's 1996. In 2019, in Sacramento County alone, the High-Tech Task Force has investigated 1,000 cyber tips referencing possible online sexual exploitation of children in just 4 months between January and April. The reality is that, in a lot of ways, every parent's worst nightmare is coming true. The sexual predator who's focusing on children isn't only waiting and watching children at the park, in the schoolyard, or trying to grab them and drag them into cars, as we heard about our victim from 20 years ago. The online predator now is waiting and watching children and keeping an eye and contacting them through devices that all of us probably have on our persons right now. Chris Cote is an example of a defendant we prosecuted in the cybercrimes unit. From 2011 to 2016, the defendant reached out to children on social media, and he used the same approach over and over and over again. He would find a profile featuring a picture of a young girl, and reach out to her and flatter her, tell her how cute she was, and start conversations like that. With surprising speed, these conversations escalated to private chats, FaceTime conversations, and sometimes even direct phone calls, where defendant Cote escalated from simply just having conversations to requesting photos and videos of various sexual acts, and even escalated to the point where he was encouraging these children to sneak out of the safety of their homes and with their parents to meet him at night in places like parks, hotels, and he would even pick them up and drive them for hours to his home out of county. Over the course of 5 years, he lured minors into doing this over and over and over again. Through the hard work and investigation of John Triplett in the Folsom Police Department, we were able to identify 7 known victims that were children he had exploited after meeting them online. We had evidence of contacting and dozens more. The only reason that we actually caught the defendant Cote was because, thanks to the efforts of Lynn Perry, who's with me today, and the Folsom Police Department, and thanks to everyone's hard work, he's currently serving 32 years and 4 months in state prison. But the story doesn't end there. The question that lingers with a lot of us prosecutors after a case is over is what happens to the families and victims after living through an experience like this, after living through what could be termed a parent's worst nightmare. Some parents and some families and victims want revenge. You know, they want the defendant to suffer. Some have trouble feeling safe in their own homes. And some simply want to forget the whole thing ever happened and pretend like it never happened. These are all totally understandable responses from everyday citizens, but the truly outstanding citizens step up and make an effort to protect other families and children from experiencing the pain they experience themselves. To borrow a phrase that Anne Marie used a minute ago, Lynette Perry is here because we rise by lifting others. What she did after dealing with this experience with defendant Cote is that she helped to create a presentation to be played at internet safety nights in the local schools. Speaking in a voice that no prosecutor or law enforcement can, speaking in a voice that only a parent or the family member of someone that's been through this kind of traumatic experience can, she created an audio presentation that is currently being used to educate other parents in the community about keeping their children safe. Now, I'd like to share her message, or a few minutes of her message in her own words.
I am sharing my story about how my daughter was groomed and abducted by a pedophile in order to help other children and parents. If it can happen to my family here in Folsom, it can happen to yours. She was just 13. She was taught to ignore or run from strangers and was told to never go with anyone asking her to get into a car or help them find their lost dog. All the normal safety conversations that parents have with young children. I thought she was safe here with me. I was wrong. When I got her the iPhone, I felt as though I was doing a great thing, safety-wise. Around the end of August, she downloaded a kids app that allowed you to talk with other kids around the globe. She was feeling a little sad about some friendship struggles and wanted to reach out to other kids that would understand what she was going through. What she found was an adult man pretending to be a young boy, and that is where the grooming began. Almost all of the early conversations began with, "You are so pretty, you should be a model. You have the most beautiful hair and eyes," or some sort of compliment that made her want to hear more. Those conversations led him to ask for pictures, and it very quickly went from innocent compliments to very directive requests for sexual conversation and photos. On September 9th, a mere 10 days after this started, he requested that they meet up and hang out. I am lucky enough to write our story today because in our case, he did bring her home that night. It is terrifying to think of what could have happened. He is in jail today because my daughter was strong enough to tell her story and give the detectives enough information to find him. He is 32 years old and drove to my home in the middle of the night from a town over an hour away. He will no longer be able to hurt any other girls, but my heart aches for all the victims that may not have had a parent who paid enough attention to subtle changes and looked below the surface. Please take control of your child's use of their phone and computer. Check their phones, get their passwords and usernames. Randomly do spot checks, and if your child will not give up their phone, most likely there is something going on that they are hiding. You have to get involved. Be proactive and strict. None of this is 100% foolproof, but it's better. It means for her that she knows I'm watching, that I'm involved and I care. Most of all, please trust your instincts. Please do your part in keeping your kids safe in this age of technology.
And for the reasons I've talked about before, that we rise by lifting others. Lynette Perry has taken this terribly negative experience and turned it into a positive one to help protect and keep the children of our community safe. As I mentioned before, none of this would have been possible without the efforts of Detective Triplett and the victim advocates involved in the case, Tatiana Morphus and Ann Tran, and investigative work with the High-Tech Task Force. And one more happy postscript about the case. In addition to the defendant being a guest of the state for the next 3 decades plus, he, our victim in this case, Ms. Perry's daughter, is actually interested in a career in law enforcement based on her experiences here. And she's in the process of trying to arrange a ride-along today, I'd like to present to you for the Outstanding Victim Citizen Award, Ms. Diane.
I just wanted to take a moment to say that I'm very honored to have this award today. But it really truly is a reflection of everybody that we have come in contact from the very beginning, from day one when the report went out and Detective Triplett came and took our report. I can't say enough that from the detectives to the victims witness, the programs, everything that the County of Sacramento and the City of Folsom have in place really truly was the foundation for the strength that I got to lift our heads up and to not try and forget that this happened and to find the strength to share our story at some point with others. It was a challenge. Every day for the first, at least the first couple of weeks, it was a blur. And without everybody guiding us along with compassion and with kindness and with strength, we wouldn't have the results that we have today. And I really do need to thank Detective Triplett for his time and his compassion, Detective Roberry, who's not here today, for his hours and hours and hours of looking through forensic information to try and get all of the convictions that we did. I need to thank Bruce Chang because he put up with all of my emails, all of my phone calls, and every question I had, and he really was a rock during this process. And we got to a conviction that we can all be proud of. And it was a long haul, but we were able to get there. So from this experience, I have a new passion for getting this information out there, for educating parents that if it can happen to us, it can happen to anybody. We are a normal, wholesome family, and never in a million years did I ever think that something like this could have happened to us, but it did. And we're on the process of mending I'm here because my daughter had the strength and the courage to stand up and give them the information that they needed. And to watch her heal and fight back from this is truly inspirational. So I'm hoping that we can help whatever family out there by my story and for getting the awareness out there, then this has been definitely something that is what's the word for it? It's for nothing. It's not for nothing. So I want to say thank you again for this award, and I really appreciate the honor.
I'll abbreviate Kevin Higgins up for the next presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Special welcome to the Forberg family who is here in force. Welcome. In the late morning hours of February 22nd, 2018, a veteran Sacramento police officer, Charles Gomez, responded to a call of disturbance near the intersection of Aldous Avenue and 63rd Street, East Sacramento. It was there that he came in contact with the defendant, who claimed that he was looking for his car and had lost it. Officer Gomez took the defendant in his patrol car and offered to help him find his vehicle. As Officer Gomez helped the defendant, he realized that the defendant was making less and less sense in what he was saying. He realized that they were also near Mercy Hospital and the defendant might benefit from a mental health examination. So he took him to the hospital to get some help. As the defendant was going through intake at the hospital, things quickly changed. You'll see in a moment Officer Gomez, who is helping a person in need, has to quickly respond to an abruptly changing situation.
Este va a ver si te puede ayudar para que te seas mejor. Hey, bueno, ¿qué estás haciendo? Hey. What problem? I got me run from you. Hey, pará! Hey, come here. ¿Qué estás corriendo? ¿Por qué? Quiero darte ayuda, man. Quiero ayudar. No hagas eso. No hagas eso. Vamos a matarnos, güey. Hey, man, I'm here to help. That's secure.
The video that you saw is from Officer Gomez's body camera, which was knocked off when the defendant abruptly turned and attacked Officer Gomez, and in the process eventually getting Officer Gomez's gun. The video of the sunny blue skies with clouds stands in stark contrast to the lethal struggle that was taking place on the ground as Officer Gomez fought for his life and the life of others in the neighborhood as the defendant repeatedly fired at the officer's gun. The video you saw was actually shortened from the original. The pursuit was actually longer than what's shown there. And what's not immediately apparent on the video is that the defendant, when he's running from the hospital, is headed right into a elementary school playground, which was full of school children at recess at the time. And most of the pursuit was alongside of the school going down towards 39th and H Street. And as you saw, the struggle occurred right outside of a small apartment complex, which was less than 20 feet away from where the struggle was. As you heard on the video, the defendant, unfortunately that day, had death on his mind. As you heard him say, "We are going to kill ourselves," as he fired Officer Gomez's gun while the officer held down the defendant's wrist in an effort to gain control of the gun. With the outcome of this massive struggle very much uncertain, our outstanding Service or Citizen Award recipient Harry Forberg, with his wife, who is here today, in the passenger seat of his vehicle, was in traffic at 39th and H at the time. As he was stopped at a red light at 39th and H, he heard the unmistakable sound of gunshots and saw Officer Gomez fighting for his life. At that moment, our recipient, Mr. Forberg, an off-duty fighter with the Lathrop-Manteca Fire District, immediately realized that that officer needed some help. Without hesitating, without regard for his own personal safety or that of his wife, he abandoned his vehicle and ran over to help the officer. He jumped into the fray, telling the officer, "Hey man, I'm here to help you." Mr. Forberg placed a hold on the defendant, which allowed Officer Gomez to regain control of the gun. He subdued the defendant until other officers arrived and were able to handcuff the defendant. This case also serves as a vivid reminder of how law enforcement officers work in very difficult and dangerous conditions. In most of our work, especially us as prosecutors, if things don't go according to plan, the judge rules against us, or verdict doesn't go our way, at the end of the day, we still get to go home. For our law enforcement officers, and Unfortunately, an unexpected situation at work can be the difference between going home or not going home at all. Thankfully, our recipient, Eric Forberg, was there to save the day. His courage undoubtedly saved lives on an otherwise quiet, sunny day in East Sacramento. Anne Marie, it's my pleasure to present you Eric Forberg for this year's Outstanding.
Thank you. I'm very honored to receive this, especially after hearing the stories of the other people that are here today. I think it's one thing to do something in a moment where it needs to be done, and that's kind of what my job as a firefighter is. But it's another very brave thing to stand up to something when you know it's going to be a long, drawn-out process. It could be emotionally taxing, and I'm honored to be up here with the other people that have been nominated. I would like to thank God for putting me in that spot at that moment and protecting myself and my wife. Otherwise, it could have been very different. So we're being watched over, and thank you.
Amazing, really amazing. Last recipient.
On January 15, 2015, the FBI announced that America's Most Wanted California child molester and fugitive had finally been caught. Imagine being the sexual assault victim of an America's Most Wanted sexual offender. Imagine that the abuse you suffered started when you were 12 years old and ended when you were 14 years old. Imagine that the people who are supposed to be closest to you and who you're supposed to be able to count on through life's greatest tragedies choose to support the abuser instead of you. Now imagine that it takes 10 years for your abuser to be caught and brought to justice. Can anyone here imagine a positive outcome for that child? I certainly couldn't. But we're here today because Brittany is that positive outcome. Despite 10 tumultuous years and against all odds, Brittany chose not to let her circumstances define her. Brittany used the trauma that she endured and the horrible circumstances that she encountered and used those to motivate her to make a difference in the life of others. Brittany's mother met the defendant when she was pregnant with Brittany. The defendant was abusive to Brittany's mother, and that abuse continued after Brittany was born. Despite the abuse, Brittany's mother had 2 other children with the defendant, who are Brittany's brothers. Brittany's mom finally left the defendant when Brittany was 4 years old, and when she left the defendant, she took Brittany with her. The next real contact that Brittany had with the defendant was when she was in 6th grade and just about 12 years old. Her mother did not have a stable upbringing for her or a stable home environment, so she sent Brittany to live with the defendant and her brothers. Brittany was so excited to be able to grow up with her brothers and to have what she thought would be a stable home environment. Unfortunately, the opportunity to live with her brothers brought with it unspeakable abuse by the defendant. Shortly after Brittany moved in with the defendant began to sexually abuse her. Brittany endured horrific, continual abuse by the defendant from the time she was 12 until she was 14 years old. After Brittany turned 14, she begged her mother to come back and get her and take her away from the defendant's house so that she could go live with her mother. And eventually her mother did come pick her up. And about 6 months after living with her mother, Brittany had the courage to disclose what the defendant had been doing to her. Brittany's disclosure prompted an investigation which was handled by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Fortunately for this case, the investigation was placed in the hands of now Sergeant Kevin Gibbons. Sergeant Kevin Gibbons was the person who stayed through the entire process, from start when Brittany disclosed in April 2007 until February 2018, when Sergeant Gibbons was standing there for the defendant's guilty verdicts. On November 7th of 2007, a warrant was issued for the defendant's arrest. The very next day, the defendant fled the United States and went to Mexico. The defendant was a United States citizen fugitive living in Morelia, Mexico, under an alias, and the defendant even opened his own business while he was there. For 7 years, numerous tips came into the FBI and the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department regarding the defendant's possible whereabouts, yet the defendant continued to evade justice. It was ultimately the defendant's own decision to open his own business that led to his capture. Meanwhile, as the defendant is a fugitive in Mexico, Brittany is still continuing to struggle with the effects of her past trauma and the uncertainty of knowing when or even if justice would ever come. Yet, as a young adult, Brittany began to start working with youth. She worked at a substance abuse recovery center, and then she went back to school and got her Associate of Arts degree in psychology. Thankfully, the Sacramento County Major Crimes Unit never stopped pursuing the defendant. And finally, in August of 2015, the defendant was extradited back to the United States to face his pending criminal charges. As many of us know, extradition back to the United States is just the beginning of a lengthy process. Brittany endured that process without any support from her family. Her brothers, who she cared so dearly about, chose to support their father, the defendant. And one of her brothers even proffered testimony against her at trial. On the eve of trial, one of her brothers gave an ultimatum that was very clear, that if Brittany chose to testify truthfully in this case, then her brother would cease communication with her completely. Despite a horrible threat from someone she still cared about, Brittany walked into that courtroom and told the truth about what happened, and she did that with no familial support in that audience. None. Thankfully, there was a group of individuals who never gave up on seeing that Brittany got justice, and that includes Sergeant Gibbons with the Sheriff's Department, Tatiana Morphus, the victim advocate, and Joyce Thorbrimson and Terry Castiglia, who are criminal investigators with the District Attorney's Office. Brittany waited 10 years for justice, and she did so with incredible patience, strength, and grace. And although the wheels of justice turned slow for her, Brittany's resiliency did not. She recently transitioned into a current position which she's extremely proud of. She's working with foster youth at the Department of Human Services in the Child Protective Services Unit. A child who lived through unimaginable things now dedicates herself every day to improving the lives of children around her. And for this reason, Anne Marie, I present to you Brittany for this year's Outstanding Citizens Award.
So I just want to say thank you. Katrina probably couldn't have put it any better. I just wanted to say that in the beginning, and for how long it did take, I did not think that I would get to where I am today. I thank everybody that was there for me that I didn't really get to meet. That was just kind of behind the scenes. You guys really did make it happen, and I appreciate it. And just want to thank my fiance for being here with me and for his family, being the supportive family that I do need. So that's it. Thank you.
I think these recipients not only deserve it, but demonstrate why we have such a year. So lastly, before we end today, because last year we started a new award. It's called the Beacon of Hope. And I'm going to say it again, it's like Bruce James said, we rise by lifting others. And this award is given to an individual or organization that goes above and beyond the duties of victim advocacy. It goes to an individual whose dedication to the well-being of others is exemplified by the strength, empathy, and compassion towards victims of crime. This year's recipient is especially personal. It's probably going to be emotional. It's not only that, but it's going to be very inspirational, I have no doubt. And for that, I'd like to invite up Deputy DA Tim Hope to provide our Beacon of Hope award.
Good morning. This morning, I'd like to provide you with 3 descriptions of 3 very different people. I'm going to ask you to sort of guess as to who I'm describing. Person number 1 loves to run Spartan races. He has a tremendous amount of grit and determination and is highly competitive. When it comes to maintaining the plank position in the gym, he's a beast. He can hold it for over 20 minutes. He grunts when he works out. He refuses to eat any vegetables or condiments. Person number 2, he loves to drive a purple Miata. He loves to bake cakes and decorate them with fancy fondant. In college, he took a trampoline jumping class. And his favorite slot machine to play has Wonder Woman on it. Person number 3 is always smiling, eternally optimistic, a caring friend, an inspiration, and an advocate for those who are unable or cannot or will not speak on their own behalf. Although those are very different people with different personalities, they are in one person, and that is Keith Hill. I first met Keith back in 2004 when I was on the prelim team and he was on felony team 1. And I recall at one point talking to, he's now a judge, Curtis Fiorini, who was in our office. And I jokingly said to Curtis, I said, Curtis, what's the deal with this guy Keith Hill? He's always smiling. Nobody smiles that much. I don't trust the guy. And so Curtis looked at me and he smiled. And then he nervously laughed and said, no, Keith is a good guy. He's a great guy. He's phenomenal. In the last 15 years or so, I've gotten to know Keith, and I can say without question, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Keith Hill is a great guy. He is phenomenal. He exemplifies the very spirit of the Beacon of Hope Award. And in those last 15 years or so, Keith and I have spent time together on the ASAP team, where we spent hours figuring out how to cross-examine a defendant or coaching mock trial together. And Keith was always the good cop to my bad cop. He was always the person that built up a student spirit after somebody else tore it down. And our job as prosecutors is and will always be to seek justice for any and all victims, regardless of whether or not they are saints or sinners, whether or not they demand justice or shun it. We always push forward without much fanfare, and sometimes with much criticism. We march forward because we have to advocate on behalf of our victims. And since May of 2001, Keith has been that advocate. After stints on the misdemeanor team, juvie, domestic violence, and prelim and felony teams, he spent time on the ASAP team with Mike Kane, Casey Newton, and our supervisor, Robin Gold. And then he was in the JTI unit with Blazina and with Don Leday. And then in January of 2015, this office had the vision and the wisdom to make him the supervisor of the largest special team in the office, domestic violence. And he was running that unit, and he was working out and living life. But life has a way of testing our spirit and our strength. And life doesn't test our spirit and our strength in the sunshine of happiness, but rather in the deep valley of adversity. Nothing tests you like cancer. It was on May the 19th, 2018, when Keith was running a Spartan race in Riverside, and he collapsed after suffering a seizure. Paramedics airlifted him over to a local hospital. I remember getting a phone call from Paul Durenberger, and Paul was choking up on the phone with emotion. Within weeks, the doctors gave Keith a devastating diagnosis that a 6-inch tumor had wrapped itself around a main artery in the frontal and temporal lobe of his brain, an area of the brain that controls cognitive and speech functions. The doctors were able to remove approximately 70% of that tumor, but the remaining 30% could not be removed because of its location near the artery. They took it out. Keith had this scar on the side of his head with a metal plate, but he kept coming to work. He then had to go through radiation treatment, 30 aggressive treatments of radiation, but he kept coming to work. The radiation caused his brain to swell, but he kept coming to work. His hands would shake uncontrollably, but he kept coming to work. Then he had to go through 7 rounds of chemotherapy, which he's still going through right now. He described chemotherapy as suffering from the worst flu of your life after running a Spartan race and getting salmonella poisoning. But he kept coming to work. On one particularly bad morning, Keith was sobbing in his closet because he couldn't remember how to dress himself. But he wouldn't give up, he wouldn't give in, and he kept coming to work. He's been an inspiration to many of us. I remember late last year when Billy Satchel was in some nasty gang trial where the witnesses didn't want to show up, and most of them had to be arrested. And I remember Billy coming back from a particularly long day in the courtroom. And you could see it in his eyes, and you could just sense the weight on him. And Billy sat down in the chair in front of me, and he said, "It was a bad day, but I can't complain. I can't complain because if Keith Hill can come to work with cancer and not complain and smile, then I shouldn't complain at all." He kept coming to work. And I remember in September of 2018, the police arrested a NorCal rapist. And Anne-Marie and the office assigned Keith and Chris Ward to prosecute the NorCal rapist. And Keith told me that he was so excited, he was so inspired, and that he was going to make it through and try that case. And I talked to Chris a little bit, and Chris told me that Keith never missed a victim witness, never missed a briefing on the case, never missed a court appearance. He kept coming to work. In the last 10 years or 12 years, I've coached mock trial with Keith over at McGeorge. I think we have about 10 or 12 of our students here in attendance. Every one of them is either an intern in the office, an incoming LRA, and there are other attorneys in this office that have been personally coached by Keith. And I remember late at night when we practiced after work, I could see Keith stand up and he'd stagger down the hall. And he would lean up against the wall so he wouldn't fall over, shuffling down. And he would come back after a short break and start teaching and training our soon-to-be prosecutors. And so when Nat Luna and Leland Washington came to me and said that, it'd be a good idea to nominate Keith for this award, I thought it was a great idea. And I sat down with Keith a couple weeks ago and I asked him, "Keith, why don't you just take a break? Travel with your family. Do some of the things on your bucket list." And he said no. Because if I did that, it would mean that I was giving up on life, that I was giving into cancer, that I would be giving up on my family, that I would be giving up on my victims, giving up on living. And I'm never going to do that. Anne-Marie mentioned a moment ago the mission statement from the Beacon of Hope Award. To an individual or an organization that has gone above and beyond service to victims of crime. That exemplify by their strength and compassion and empathy to those that have suffered. Every single one of those words truly exemplify the spirit of Keith Hill. And so it was with great honor and great privilege that I present to you, Anne-Marie, this year's recipient of the Beacon of Hope Award, Keith Hill.
I want to start by saying my meds make me emotional. I love coming to this event every year because I enjoy seeing the strength of our victims, the courage of our citizens, the tenacity of our officers who don't get the thank you that they deserve, and the DAs in our office that prosecute these crimes. And it's just so amazing to see that I usually run out of here and back to the office, throw open my file so I get ready, get in there, go to trial, do all the same things everyone else does. And that all changed for me on May 18th. Sorry. Oh. It's a dark day when someone comes in and tells you that you have a brain tumor. And you kind of go into a little bit of a dark place. So you don't know what's going to happen. This is what big Catholics do. And it's a little bit of a dark day. And you don't know what's going to happen to you. And your fears start to come up. And you start thinking, your daughter needs to be walked down an aisle. That your son needs to be congratulated after he survived your victory. And you gotta get back to work. And so you have to make a decision. And I was faced with that decision. They did the surgery, and I knew things weren't gonna be the same. And I could sit in bed and feel sorry for myself. Or I could get out of bed and I could fight. And that's exactly what I decided to do, was to get out of bed and to fight. So then the first step was, I gotta get back to work. What's gonna happen to me when I get back to work? What kind of assignment am I gonna have? What are they gonna have me do? Because you're just now you're that guy with cancer. You're that guy with brain cancer. And they told me it was malignant in stage 3. And I knew that I wanted to come back. And I could have just been pushed aside. But that didn't happen. Anne-Marie and Steve and Mike gave me the best opportunity that I probably could never have. They trusted me. I've been in this office for 18 years, and I tell anyone that asks me that this is the best job you could ever have. You get to do what's right and fight for those that need your help and work with the most amazing people in the world. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what they gave me the opportunity to do, to work on an important case, to help victims that for decades have waited for their perpetrator to be found and for us to give them justice. And I promise you, Anne-Marie, I'm not going to let you do it. We are going to fight justice been waiting. With Chris Orr, we're gonna get it done. We're gonna keep up the good fight. We're gonna find justice. But one thing, I would never do it because it's a gorgeous board, right? From the office's budget. But I would like to break it into hundreds of pieces. Because I'm not the victim. I'm not the beacon of hope. You all are. From the very first day that this happened to me, and I got to fly in a helicopter. But from the very first day when word got around, it was amazing how quickly everyone was there for me. Rides, food for my family, visits, walks around the block in the sunshine, whatever I needed. I always tell everyone it's not coworkers, it's family that we have here. And my family was there for me to lift me up and to do everything that I needed to help me get by. And I think this picture is perfect, and I'm so glad that whoever picked it, because it's the best analogy that you could ever have. Because this is everyone being there for me. I bet you a bunch of people didn't want to do this. People don't like to get muddy, people don't like to climb stuff. But it's the perfect analogy for me because everyone was there for me, and I got boosted, I got lifted, I got pushed by Mike Lazina up a wooden muddy block, and by Mike Nubbs, and I got pulled by Mike Lazina on the other side. And it was to help me get over the obstacle that I couldn't do by myself. And that's where I'm at now. There are going to be obstacles, but it doesn't matter. We're going to fight, but I would like to share this Beacon of Hope Award with all of you because this isn't really about me. I'm just a sick guy. It's about all the people that have come out and to be my Beacon of Hope. And I thank you so much.
The Spartan thing, picture there, first of all, I didn't climb the wall, just so you know. But I did cheer you on. But I thought this morning, I'm going to look up what the hell is the Spartan thing about. And I saw a couple quotes. One was, I may puke, and I might fall, and I might bleed, and I might sweat a lot, but I don't quit. And then I saw another one that said, it's not just what we do, but why and how we do it. That's what distinguishes us Spartans. You are not just a beacon of hope, Keith Hill, you are a Spartan. I'm so proud of you. And I have no doubt in the world that you and Chris Orr are going to convict that guy. So I just want to thank you all for being here. I'd ask that all the recipients please stay and we'll take a group photo, but just remember why we do this job. And be proud and go back and open that file like Keith Hill said. And just keep doing what we do, no matter how hard it is. So thank you all, and I guarantee you we'll all see you next year. I think these recipients not only deserve it, but demonstrate why we have this every year. So lastly, before we end today, because last year we started a new award. It's called the Beacon of Hope. And I'm going to say it again, it's like Bruce James said, we rise by lifting others. And this award is given to an individual or organization that goes above and beyond the duties of victim advocacy. It goes to an individual whose dedication to the well-being of others is exemplified by the strength, empathy, and compassion towards victims of crime. This year's recipient is especially personal. It's probably going to be emotional. It's not only that, but it's going to be very inspirational, I have no doubt. And for that, I'd like to invite up Deputy DA Tim Hope to provide our Beacon of Hope Award.
Good morning. This morning, I'd like to provide you with 3 descriptions of 3 very different people. I'm going to ask you to sort of guess as to who I'm describing. Person number 1 loves to run sparkling racers. He has a tremendous amount of grit and determination and is highly competitive. When it comes to maintaining the plank position in the gym, he's a beast. He can hold it for over 20 minutes. He grunts when he works out. He refuses to eat any vegetables or condiments. Person number 2, he loves to drive a purple Miata. He loves to bake cakes and decorate them with fancy fondant. In college, he took a trampoline jumping class. And his favorite slot machine to play has Wonder Woman on it. Person number 3 is always smiling, eternally optimistic, a caring friend, an inspiration, and an advocate for those who are unable or cannot or will not speak on their own behalf. Although those are very different people with different personalities, they are in one person, and that is Keith Hill. I first met Keith back in 2004 when I was on the prelim team and he was on felony team 1. And I recall at one point talking to, he's now a judge, Curtis Fiorini, who was in our office. And I jokingly said to Curtis, I said, Curtis, what's the deal with this guy Keith Hill? He's always smiling. Nobody smiles that much. I don't trust the guy. And so Curtis looked at me and he smiled. And then he nervously laughed and said, no, Keith is a good guy. He's a great guy. He's phenomenal. In the last 15 years or so, I've gotten to know Keith, and I can say without question, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Keith Hill is a great guy. He is phenomenal. He exemplifies the very spirit of the Beacon of Hope Award. And in those last 15 years or so, Keith and I have spent time together on the ASAP team, where we spent hours figuring out how to cross-examine a defendant or coaching mock trial together. And Keith was always the good cop to my bad cop. He was always the person that built up a student spirit after somebody else tore it down. And our job as prosecutors is and will always be to seek justice for any and all victims, regardless of whether or not they are saints or sinners, whether or not they demand justice or shun it. We always push forward without much fanfare, and sometimes with much criticism. We march forward because we have to advocate on behalf of our victims. And since May of 2001, Keith has been that advocate. After stints on the misdemeanor team, juvie, domestic violence, and prelim and felony teams, he spent time on the ASAP team with Mike Kane, Casey Newton, and our supervisor, Robert Gold. And then he was in the JTI unit with Luzina and with Don Leday. And then in January of 2015, this office had the vision and the wisdom to make him the supervisor of the largest special team in the office, domestic violence. And he was running that unit, and he was working out and living life. But life has a way of testing our spirit and our strength. And life doesn't test our spirit and our strength in the sunshine of happiness, but rather in the deep valley of adversity. Nothing tests you like cancer. It was on May the 19th, 2018, when Keith was running a Spartan race in Riverside and collapsed after suffering a seizure. Paramedics airlifted him over to a local hospital. I remember getting a phone call from Paul Durenberger, and Paul was choking up on the phone with emotion. Within weeks, the doctors gave Keith a devastating diagnosis that a 6-inch tumor had wrapped itself around a main artery in the frontal and temporal lobe of his brain, an area of the brain that controls cognitive and speech functions. The doctors were able to remove approximately 70% of that tumor, but the remaining 30% could not be removed because of its location near the artery. They took it out. Keith had this scar on the side of his head with a metal plate. He kept coming to work. He then had to go through radiation treatment, 30 aggressive treatments of radiation, but he kept coming to work. The radiation caused his brain to swell, but he kept coming to work. His hands would shake uncontrollably, but he kept coming to work. Then he had to go through 7 rounds of chemotherapy, which he's still going through right now. He described chemotherapy as suffering from the worst flu of your life after running a Spartan race and getting salmonella poisoning. But he kept coming to work. On one particularly bad morning, Keith was sobbing in his closet because he couldn't remember how to dress himself. But he wouldn't give up, he wouldn't give in, and he kept coming to work. He's been an inspiration to many of us. I remember late last year when Billy Satchel was in some nasty gang trial where the witnesses didn't want to show up, and most of them had to be arrested. And I remember Billy coming back from a particularly long day in the courtroom. And you could see it in his eyes, and you could just sense the weight on him. And Billy sat down in the chair in front of me, and he said, "It was a bad day, but I can't complain. I can't complain because if Keith Hill can come to work with cancer and not complain and smile, then I shouldn't complain at all." He kept coming to work. And I remember in September of 2018, the police arrested the NorCal rapist. And Anne Marie and the office assigned Keith and Chris Ward to prosecute the NorCal rapist. And Keith told me that he was so excited, he was so inspired, and that he was going to make it through and try that case. And I talked to Chris a little bit, and Chris told me that Keith never missed a victim witness, never missed a briefing on the case, never missed a court appearance. He kept coming to work. In the last 10 years or 12 years, I've coached mock trial with Keith over at McGeorge. I think we have about 10 or 12 of our students here in attendance. Every one of them is either an intern in the office, an incoming LRA, and there are other attorneys in this office that have been personally coached by Keith. And I remember late at night when we practiced after work, I could see Keith stand up and he'd stagger down the hall. And he would lean up against the wall so he wouldn't fall over, shuffling down. And he would come back after a short break and start teaching and training our soon-to-be prosecutors. And so when Nat Luna and Leland Washington came to me and said that, you know, it'd be a good idea to nominate Keith for this award, I thought it was a great idea. And I sat down with Keith a couple weeks ago and I asked him, "Keith, why don't you just take a break? Travel with your family. Do some of the things on your bucket list." And he said no. Because if I did that, it would mean that I was giving up on life, that I was giving into cancer, that I would be giving up on my family, that I would be giving up on my victims, giving up on living. And I'm never going to do that. Anne-Marie mentioned a moment ago the mission statement from the Beacon of Hope Award. To an individual or an organization that has gone above and beyond service to victims of crime. That exemplified by their strength and compassion and empathy to those that have suffered. Every single one of those words truly exemplify the spirit of Keith Hill. And so it was with great honor and great privilege that I present to you, Anne-Marie, this year's recipient of the Beacon of Hope Award, Keith Hill.
coming to this event every year because I enjoy seeing the strength of our victims, the courage of our citizens, the tenacity of our officers who don't get the thank you that they deserve, and the DAs in our office that prosecute these crimes. And it's just so amazing to see that I usually run out of here and back to the office, throw open my file so I can get ready and get in there and go to trial and do all the same things everyone else did. And that all changed for me on May 18th. Sorry. Oh. It's a dark day when someone comes in and tells you that you have a brain tumor. And you kind of go into a little bit of a dark place. So you don't know what's going to happen. This is what big traffic is doing. And it's a little bit of a dark day. And you don't know what's going to happen to you. And your fears start to come. And you start thinking, your daughter needs to be walked down an aisle. That your son needs to be congratulated after he served his surgery. And you got to get back to work. And so you have to make a decision. And I was faced with that decision. They did the surgery, and I knew things weren't going to be the same. And I could sit in bed and feel sorry for myself. Or I could get out of bed and I could fight. And that's exactly what I decided to do, was to get out of bed and to fight. So then the first step was, I got to get back to work. What's going to happen to me when I get back to work? What kind of assignment am I going to have? What are they going to have me do? Because you're just now you're that guy with cancer. You're that guy with brain cancer. And they told me it was malignant in stage 3. And I knew that I wanted to come back. And I could have just been pushed aside. But that didn't happen. Anne Marie and Steve and Mike gave me the best opportunity that I probably could never have. They trusted me. I've been in this office for 18 years, and I tell anyone that asks me that this is the best job you could ever have. You get to do what's right and fight for those that need your help and work with the most amazing people in the world. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what they gave me the opportunity to do, to work on an important case, to help victims that for decades have waited for their perpetrator to be found and for us to give them justice. And I promise you, Anne Marie, I'm not going to let you do. We are going to fight justice for these victims that have waited. With Chris Orr, we're going to get it done. We're going to keep up the good fight. We're going to find justice. But one thing, I would never do it because it's a gorgeous board. Right? The office's budget. But I would like to break it into hundreds of pieces because I'm not the victim. I'm not the beacon of hope. You all are. From the very first day that this happened to me, and I got to fly in a helicopter. But from the very first day when word got around, it was amazing how quickly everyone was there for me. Rides, food for my family, visits, walks around the block in the sunshine, whatever I needed. I always tell everyone it's not coworkers, it's family that we have here. And my family was there for me to lift me up and to do everything that I needed to help me get by. And I think this picture is perfect, and I'm so glad that whoever picked it, because it's the best analogy that you could ever have, because this is everyone being there for me. I bet you a bunch of people didn't want to do this. People don't like to get muddy, people don't like to climb stuff, but it's the perfect analogy for me, because everyone was there for me, and I got boosted, I got lifted, I got pushed by Mike Lazina up a wooden muddy block, and by Mike Nubbs, and I got pulled by Mike Lazina on the other side. And it was to help me get over the obstacle that I couldn't do by myself. And that's where I'm at now. There are going to be obstacles, but it doesn't matter. We're going to fight, but I would like to share this Beacon of Hope Award with all of you, because this isn't really about me. I'm just a sick guy. It's about all the people that have come out and to be my beacon of hope. And I thank you so much.